China, a civilization spanning over 4 millennia. A land where ancient wisdom meets cutting-edge technology, where imperial dynasties gave way to revolution, and where 1/5 of humanity calls home. This is the story of how China became China, a journey through triumph and tragedy, innovation and invasion, philosophy and power. To understand China today, we must travel back to where it all began, to the mists of prehistory along the banks of the Yellow River. Ancient China, around 10,000 years ago, as the last ice age retreated, small groups of hunter-gatherers began settling along two great rivers, the Yellow River in the north and the Yangtze River in the south. These waterways would become the cradle of Chinese civilization. By 5000 BCE, the Yangshao culture emerged along the Yellow River. These early farmers cultivated millet, raised pigs and dogs, and created distinctive painted pottery. They lived in semi-subterranean houses and began forming complex social structures. This was not yet China as we know it, but the seeds were being planted. The Longshan culture followed around 3000 BCE, bringing more sophisticated pottery, the beginnings of social hierarchy, and possibly the earliest forms of Chinese writing. But these were still fragmented societies, isolated communities scattered across a vast landscape. Then came the legends. Ancient Chinese tradition speaks of mythical sage kings who laid civilization's foundations. The Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, said to have reigned around 2700 BCE, is considered the ancestor of all Han Chinese. Fu Shi taught humans to fish and hunt. Shen Nong, the divine farmer, introduced agriculture and herbal medicine. Yu the Great tamed the great floods and established order. Were these real people? Probably not as described. But like all myths, they contain kernels of truth, memories of real leaders, real innovations, real struggles that shaped early Chinese society. The Xia, Shang, and Zhou, the first dynasties. Bronze vessels, oracle bones, ancient archaeological sites. Around 2070 BCE, tradition tells us, the Xia dynasty emerged as China's first hereditary kingdom. For centuries, historians debated whether the Xia even existed. No conclusive archaeological evidence has confirmed the dynasty, but recent discoveries at Erlitou suggest a sophisticated Bronze Age culture that may indeed be the legendary Xia. What we know for certain begins with the Shang dynasty, around 1600 BCE. The clash of bronze weapons. At the Battle of Mui, Zhou forces defeated the last Shang king, who reportedly immolated himself in his palace. But the Zhou didn't simply destroy what came before, they absorbed it, adapted it, transformed it. This would become a pattern in Chinese history. The Zhou dynasty introduced a revolutionary concept, the Mandate of Heaven. The Mandate of Heaven declared that rulers govern not by divine right of blood alone, but by virtue and moral authority. Heaven granted its mandate to the worthy and withdrew it from the corrupt. This justified the Zhou's conquest. The Shang had become decadent and tyrannical, so heaven transferred its favor to the Zhou. This concept would echo through Chinese history for 3000 years, providing both stability and justification for change. Every successful rebel and every new dynasty would claim the mandate of heaven. The Zhou period began brilliantly. The Western Zhou, 1046 to 771 BCE, established a feudal system, parceling out land to loyal relatives and allies who ruled as regional lords. Chinese culture expanded, bronze working reached new heights, and literature flourished. But eventually, the center couldn't hold. In 771 BCE, a coalition of invaders and rebellious nobles attacked the Zhou capital. The king was killed, and the dynasty relocated east to Luoyang. The Eastern Zhou period, 770 to 256 BCE, saw the feudal system unravel. Regional lords became increasingly independent, paying only lip service to the Zhou kings. This ushered in an era called the Spring and Autumn period, named after the chronicle of the state of Lu. It was a time of constant warfare between competing states, but also of remarkable cultural and intellectual flowering. And then came an even more chaotic era, the Warring States period, 475 to 221 BCE. Armies on the march. 7 major states battled for supremacy: Qin, Chu, Qi, Yang, Han, Zhao, and Wei. Warfare became total. Armies grew from thousands to hundreds of thousands. Iron weapons replaced bronze. Cavalry tactics evolved. Entire populations were mobilized. But chaos bred innovation. The Warring States period was China's golden age of philosophy. Faced with endless war and social upheaval, thinkers sought answers to fundamental questions. How should people live? What makes a good society? How can we achieve harmony and peace? Confucius, or Kongfuzi, 551 to 479 BCE, taught that social harmony came from fulfilling one's role properly, ruler to subject, father to son, elder to younger. He emphasized ritual, education, and moral self-cultivation. His philosophy would become the bedrock of Chinese civilization. Laozi, the semi-legendary founder of Taoism, taught a different path: harmony with nature, effortless action, the power of yielding. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, begins his cryptic text, the Deijing. Mozi preached universal love and condemned wasteful rituals and aggressive warfare. Legalists like Han Fizi argued for strict laws and harsh punishments, claiming that only power and control could bring order. The 100 schools of thought debated, competed, and enriched Chinese intellectual life. This was China's classical age, a period of profound creativity born from crisis. But one state was emerging victorious in the endless warfare. Qin, in the West, remote and ruthless, was about to change everything. Act TWO, Imperial China, the Great Dynasties, the Qin dynasty, unification. Dramatic shift, marching armies, construction projects. In 221 BCE, King Yingzheng of Qin completed what no ruler had achieved in centuries. He conquered all rival states and unified China under one authority. He took a new title, Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of Qin. The first emperor was a visionary and a tyrant in equal measure. Montage, Great Wall construction, book burning, standardization projects. In just 11 years, Qin Shi Huangdi transformed China. He standardized weights, measures, currency, and even the axle width of carts so they'd fit the same ruts in roads. He standardized the Chinese writing system, ensuring that despite different spoken languages, educated people across China could communicate in writing. He built an extensive road system radiating from his capital. He connected the Han Dynasty, classical China. Transition to grandeur, Silk Road caravans, grand palaces. From Qin's ashes rose the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, which would give its name to China's majority ethnic group and establish the template for Chinese civilization for 2,000 years. Liu Bang, a peasant-born rebel leader, founded the dynasty. He and his successors learned from Qin's mistakes. They retained centralized control but softened harsh legalist policies. They embraced Confucianism as the state ideology, establishing Confucian classics as the basis for civil service examinations. This was revolutionary. Instead of an aristocracy of birth, Han China created a meritocracy, at least in theory. Talented men from any background could study, pass examinations, and enter government service. This system would, with modifications, last until 1905. The Han dynasty's greatest emperor, Han Wudi, 141 to 87 BCE, expanded Chinese power dramatically. Maps showing expansion, military campaigns. He sent armies north against the Xiongnu nomads, east into Korea, and south into Vietnam. He dispatched the explorer Zhong Qian westward, opening what would become the Silk Road, a network of trade routes connecting China to Central Asia, India, the Middle East, and eventually Rome. Silk flowed west. Gold, glass, wool, and horses flowed east. But more than goods traveled these routes. Ideas, religions, and technologies spread along the Silk Road. Buddhism entered China during the later Han period, beginning its transformation into a Chinese religion. The Han period was a golden age of culture and technology. Paper was invented around 100 CE, revolutionizing record-keeping and literature. The seismograph was invented to detect earthquakes. Acupuncture and herbal medicine were systematized. History was elevated to an art form. Sima Qian wrote the records of the Grand Historian, establishing the format for all subsequent Chinese historical writing. But like all dynasties, the Han eventually declined. Darker tone, court intrigue, peasant rebellions. Palace eunuchs gained excessive power. Corruption spread. Large landowners avoided taxes while peasants bore increasing burdens. In 184 CE, the Yellow Turban Rebellion erupted, led by Daoist faith healers promising salvation to desperate peasants. The rebellion was suppressed, but the dynasty was fatally weakened. Regional warlords gained power. In 220 CE, the last Han emperor abdicated. China fractured into three kingdoms, Wei, Shu, and Wu, beginning nearly 4 centuries of division. Segment 3, Division and Reunification, the Sui and Tang. Warfare and Chaos. The period of disunion, 220 to 589 CE, was an age of warfare, but also of profound cultural change. Northern China fell to nomadic invaders, barbarians who established their own dynasties. Southern China remained under Han Chinese rule, with refugees fleeing south, bringing culture and technology with them. This forced China to confront a fundamental question: what made someone Chinese? Was it ethnicity or culture? Gradually, a consensus emerged. Anyone who adopted Chinese culture, language, and customs could become Chinese. This cultural assimilationism would allow China to absorb repeated waves of invaders. Buddhism flourished during this period. Monasteries became centers of learning. Buddhist art and architecture transformed the Chinese landscape. Great cave temples were carved at Yungang and Longmen. Chinese Buddhism developed its own schools and practices, adapting Indian Buddhism to Chinese thought. In 589 CE, the Sui dynasty reunified China. Triumphant but brief. The Sui, 581 to 618 CE, were transformative but short-lived. They reconstructed the Great Wall, built the Grand Canal connecting northern and southern China, still the world's longest canal, and reorganized the government. But costly military campaigns and massive construction projects exhausted the people. Rebellions erupted, and the dynasty collapsed after only 37 years. Yet once again, collapse gave way to glory. The Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, rose from Sui's ruins. Golden Age imagery. The Tang is remembered as China's Golden Age. The capital, Chang'an, became the world's largest and most cosmopolitan city with over 1 million inhabitants. Merchants from Persia, Arabia, India, and Central Asia walked its streets. Act 3. Medieval China, Sophistication and Invasion. Segment the Song Dynasty, Commercial Revolution. Shift to urban sophistication, markets, scholars, technology. The Song Dynasty, 960–1279, never matched the Tang's military power or territorial extent, but it achieved something perhaps more remarkable, an economic and cultural revolution that made China the world's most advanced civilization. Song China was the world's first modern economy. Paper money was introduced. A market economy flourished. Urbanization reached unprecedented levels. Kaifeng and later Hangzhou became megacities with populations over 1 million. Restaurants, entertainment districts, and a vibrant commercial culture emerged. Technology soared to new heights. Montage, inventions and innovations. The movable type printing press was invented, though it never became as revolutionary in China as in Europe because of the complexity of Chinese characters. Gunpowder, invented exploration. Then in the early 15th century, the Ming launched spectacular naval expeditions. Admiral Zheng he commanded enormous treasure fleets, some ships over 400 feet long, that sailed to Southeast Asia, India, Arabia, and East Africa. These voyages demonstrated Chinese power and brought tribute from distant kingdoms. Then, suddenly, they stopped. In the 1430s, the Ming court decided to abandon the treasure voyages. Resources were redirected to defending against Mongol raids in the north. China turned inward, away from maritime trade and foreign engagement. This decision would have profound consequences. Just as China withdrew, European maritime exploration was beginning. The Ming dynasty's final 2 centuries saw growing economic prosperity alongside political problems. Trade flourished despite official restrictions. New world crops, corn, sweet potatoes, peanuts, arrived via Spanish Manila, transforming Chinese agriculture and enabling population growth. Literature and art thrived. But the government grew rigid and corrupt. Eunuchs gained excessive power at court. Inflation eroded finances. And in the northeast, a new threat was rising, the Manchus. Act 4. Early modern China, Triumph and Trauma. The Qing dynasty, the last empire. Shift in tone, a new era. In 1644, peasant rebels led by Li Zicheng captured Beijing. The last Ming emperor hanged himself on a hill behind the Forbidden City. But the rebels' triumph was brief. Ming generals invited the Manchus, a people from northeast of China, to help restore order. The Manchus came and didn't leave. They established the Qing dynasty, China's last imperial dynasty and second period of foreign rule. Like the Mongols, the Qing faced the challenge of ruling China without being absorbed by it. They adopted Chinese government structures and Confucian ideology, but maintained distinct Manchu identity. Chinese men were forced to adopt the Manchu hairstyle, the queue, with shaved forehead and long braided ponytail, as a sign of submission. But the Qing proved to be effective rulers. The 18th century under Emperors Kangxi, Yongjing, and Qianlong was a golden age. Images of expansion and prosperity. The Qing expanded China to its greatest extent, conquering Taiwan, Mongolia, Tibet, and Xinjiang. The empire was vast, diverse, and, for a time, prosperous. Population exploded, reaching 300 million by 1800. Agriculture flourished with new crops from the Americas. Trade was extensive despite official restrictions. Arts and crafts reached extraordinary refinement. Porcelain, jade carving, painting, poetry, all flourished under imperial patronage. The Emperor Qianlong was himself a poet and art collector, amassing enormous treasures in the Forbidden City. But clouds were gathering. Ominous transition. China's success contained the seeds of crisis. Rapid population growth outstripped agricultural expansion. Increasing poverty bred discontent. Government corruption grew. And at China's periphery, a new force was arriving: European imperialism. For centuries, Europeans had traded with China on Chinese terms, confined to Canton and forced to follow Chinese regulations. Europeans bought vast quantities of Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain but had little to sell in return. They paid in silver, creating a massive trade deficit. Then the British found something the Chinese would buy: opium. The century of humiliation. Dark, tragic tone, national trauma. The Opium Wars, 1839 to 1842 and 1856 to 1860, shattered China's confidence and opened transition to internal chaos. In 1850, a failed civil service examination candidate named Hong Shouchuan, influenced by Christian missionary tracts, declared himself the younger brother of Jesus Christ and launched the Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, was one of history's bloodiest conflicts. Hong Shouchuan established the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace in southern China, promising land redistribution, gender equality, and an end to Manchu rule. The rebellion spread rapidly among desperate peasants. For 14 years, China was torn by civil war. Cities were besieged, populations massacred, and farmlands devastated. When the Qing finally suppressed the rebellion with help from regional armies and Western mercenaries, between 20 and 30 million people had died, more than World War I. Other rebellions followed: the Nyan Rebellion, the Dungan Revolt, the Pantai Rebellion. The Qing dynasty was crumbling. Some Chinese officials recognized that China needed fundamental reform. Moment of attempted modernization. The self-strengthening movement of the 1860s to 1890s attempted to adopt Western technology while preserving Chinese culture: Chinese learning for fundamental principles, Western learning for practical application. Arsenals and shipyards were built. Students were sent abroad. Telegraph lines and railways were constructed. But it wasn't enough. Conservative forces at court resisted change. Corruption undermined modernization efforts. And when China went to war with Japan in 1894 to 1895, the results were shocking. Stunning defeat. Japan, a small island nation that had only begun modernizing in 1868, utterly defeated China. The Treaty of Shimonoseki forced China to recognize Korean independence, making Korea vulnerable to Japanese control, cede Taiwan to Japan, and pay a massive indemnity. For China, this was perhaps the most humiliating blow of all. For 2,000 years, China had been East Asia's center of civilization, with Japan as a cultural borrower. Now the student had surpassed the master. Reformers advocated radical change. In 1898, the young Guangxu Emperor attempted comprehensive reforms, the 100 Days Reform, to transform China into a constitutional monarchy with modern institutions. But conservatives led by the Empress Dowager Cixi staged a coup, imprisoned the emperor, and reversed the reforms. Frustrated by failure to reform and expel foreigners, popular anger exploded in the Boxer Rebellion, 1899 to 1901. The Boxers, a martial arts society believing they were impervious to bullets through spiritual practice, besieged foreign legations in Beijing. An 8-nation foreign army invaded China, defeated the Boxers, and imposed yet another humiliating treaty. Revolution and Republic, 6 minutes. Building momentum, revolutionary fervor. By the early 20th century, many Chinese concluded that the Qing dynasty couldn't be reformed, it had to be overthrown. Revolutionary sentiment grew, especially among overseas Chinese students and in southern China. Sun Yat-sen, a doctor educated in Hawaii and Hong Kong, became the revolution's leader. His 3 principles of the people, nationalism, democracy, and people's livelihood, offered a vision for a new China. In October 1911, a minor military uprising in Wuchang sparked a chain reaction. Province after province declared independence from the Qing. The revolution succeeded with surprising speed. In February 1912, the last emperor, 6-year-old Puyi, abdicated. 2,000 years of imperial rule ended. Optimism turning to chaos. The Republic of China was established with Sun Yat-sen as provisional president. For a brief moment, hope flourished. China would become a modern democracy, would reclaim its sovereignty, would join the community of nations as an equal. But that hope quickly faded. The Republic was fragile. Sun Yat-sen stepped aside for General Yuan Shikai, who had military power. Yuan attempted to make himself emperor, sparking revolts. When Yuan died in 1916, central authority collapsed. China fragmented under regional warlords who fought each other in shifting alliances. Meanwhile, World War I raised expectations. China declared war on Germany, hoping to regain German concessions in Shandong province. Chinese laborists served behind the lines in Europe. Surely China's contributions would be rewarded. Instead, the Treaty of Versailles gave Germany's Shandong concessions to Japan, not China. Anger and protest. On May 4, 1919, students in Beijing protested this betrayal. The May 4th movement spread nationwide, becoming a cultural awakening. Intellectuals called for total rejection of traditional culture, embracing science and democracy. Mr. Science and Mr. Democracy were China's salvation, they proclaimed. From this ferment, 2 new political forces emerged: the reorganized Nationalist Party, Kuomintang or KMT, led by Sun Yat-sen, and the Chinese Communist Party, founded in 1921. Act 5: Modern China, War, Revolution, and Rebirth. War and Revolution. After Sun Yat-sen's death in 1925, Chiang Kai-shek became the nationalist leader. In 1926, he launched the Northern Expedition to unify China by defeating the warlords. Initially, nationalists and communists cooperated. But in 1927, Chiang turned on his communist allies, massacring thousands in Shanghai and other cities. The survivors fled. Mao Zedong, a young communist organizer, escaped to the countryside and began building a peasant-based revolutionary movement. This defied Marxist orthodoxy, which emphasized urban workers, but it fit Chinese realities. Civil war begins. Nationalist and communist forces fought a brutal civil war through the late 1920s and early 1930s. Chiang's campaigns drove the communists from their southern bases. In 1934, the communists began the Long March, a 6,000-mile retreat through some of China's harshest terrain. Of the 80,000 who began the march, only about 8,000 reached Yangon in the northwest. Mao Zedong emerged from the Long March as the Communist Party's undisputed leader. But an even greater threat was emerging: Japanese imperialism. Shift to existential threat. Japan had occupied Manchuria in 1931, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. In July 1937, a skirmish at the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing escalated into full-scale war. Japanese forces swept into China with horrifying brutality. The rape of Nanjing in December 1937 remains one of history's worst atrocities. For 6 weeks, Japanese soldiers massacred somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, and raped tens of thousands of women. The world was shocked, but did little to stop Japan. The Sino-Japanese War merged with World War II. China fought on, supported by the United States and Britain, but at tremendous cost. Nationalist and communist forces nominally cooperated against Japan but continued maneuvering against each other. Nationalist corruption and incompetence alienated the population. The communists built support through land reform and effective guerrilla warfare. Sounds of World War II: bombs, aircraft. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, China had suffered more than any nation except the Soviet Union: at least 15 million dead, cities destroyed, economy shattered. And China's ordeal wasn't over. Civil war immediately resumed between nationalists and communists. Despite American support, Chiang's nationalist government was exhausted and corrupt. Communist forces, by contrast, were disciplined and enjoyed growing popular support. The tide turned rapidly. Momentous declaration. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong stood atop Tiananmen Gate in Beijing and proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. "The Chinese people have stood up," he declared. Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government fled to Taiwan, where the Republic of China continues to exist today, a separate political entity claiming to be China's legitimate government. After a century of defeat, humiliation, and chaos, a unified Chinese government controlled the mainland once again. But what kind of China would it be? Mao's China, Revolution and Catastrophe, 7 minutes. Ideological fervor, revolutionary. Mao Zedong envisioned transforming China into a communist utopia. The early years brought land reform that redistributed property from landlords to peasants, along with violence that killed hundreds of thousands of landlords and class enemies. The new government suppressed dissent, controlled thought and expression, and demanded total loyalty. But it also brought stability, reduced corruption, and provided basic health care and education. Women gained legal equality. Infrastructure was rebuilt. For many Chinese, after decades of chaos, the new government seemed to offer hope. Then came disaster. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, an attempt to rapidly transform China into an industrial powerhouse through mass mobilization and collective farming. Peasants were organized into communes. Backyard furnaces were built to produce steel. It was catastrophic. Agricultural production collapsed. Unrealistic quotas and false reporting meant grain was exported while people starved. Natural disasters worsened the situation. The result was the Great Chinese Famine, the deadliest famine in human history. Between 1959 and 1961, somewhere between 15 and 45 million people died. The party forced Mao to step back from daily governance. But in 1966, fearing he was losing influence, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. Chaos and destruction. Mao called on young people to rebel against the four olds: old customs, culture, habits, and ideas. Red Guards rampaged through cities, destroying temples, burning books, attacking teachers and intellectuals. Anyone associated with traditional culture or foreign influence became a target. Millions were persecuted, tortured, killed, or driven to suicide. Schools closed. The economy was disrupted. China descended into chaos. The Cultural Revolution lasted a decade, ending only with Mao's death in 1976. Its scars remain. An entire generation lost education and opportunity. Priceless cultural treasures were destroyed. Trust between people was shattered. After Mao's death, his designated successor was quickly pushed aside. Deng Xiaoping, a pragmatic leader who had been purged twice during the Cultural Revolution, emerged as China's paramount leader. Reform and rise. Contemporary China. Transformation. Modern, dynamic music. Deng Xiaoping didn't reject Communist Party rule, but he fundamentally changed China's direction with 4 words: reform and opening up. In 1978, China began allowing private enterprise, foreign investment, and market mechanisms. Special economic zones were established in coastal areas. Farmers could sell surplus production. Entrepreneurs could start businesses. It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, Deng said, as long as it catches mice. The results were extraordinary. Montage of transformation, factories, skyscrapers, infrastructure. China's economy grew at nearly 10% annually for 3 decades. Hundreds of millions of people were lifted from poverty, the greatest poverty reduction in human history. Cities transformed from bicycle-crowded streets to forests of skyscrapers. Infrastructure, highways, high-speed rail, airports, was built at unprecedented scale. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, integrating into the global economy. Chinese manufacturing became the world's factory. Chinese students flooded into foreign universities. Chinese tourists traveled the globe. But economic reform didn't bring political liberalization. Sobering moment. In spring 1989, students occupied Tiananmen Square in Beijing, demanding democracy and an end to corruption. For weeks, the world watched as protests spread to cities across China. Then, on June 4th, the government sent in troops and tanks. The exact death toll remains unknown, likely hundreds, possibly thousands. The message was clear: economic freedom, yes; political freedom, no. The Communist Party would maintain absolute control. Under leaders from Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao to Xi Jinping, China has continued growing, modernizing, and asserting itself globally. The Belt and Road Initiative extends Chinese influence across Asia, Africa, and beyond. China has become the world's second-largest economy, a technological powerhouse, a military power, and an ambitious global player. But challenges remain: income inequality, environmental degradation, an aging population, tensions with the United States and neighbors, and questions about political freedom and human rights. Act 6. Legacy. How history shaped modern China. Reflective, synthesizing tone. To understand China today, we must understand its history, all 4,000 years of it. From ancient dynasties, China inherited a belief in unity and centralized government. The idea that China should be one, unified entity, not fragmented into separate nations, is deeply rooted. The recurring pattern of unity, fragmentation, and reunification shaped Chinese political consciousness. From Confucius came an emphasis on social harmony, hierarchy, education, and moral cultivation. Respect for authority, family, and tradition remain powerful forces, even after communist attempts to destroy old culture. The examination system's legacy lives on in China's education system and belief in meritocracy. From the imperial system came bureaucratic sophistication and the concept of the mandate of heaven, rulers governed by virtue and performance, not divine right alone. This legitimacy based on results, not democracy, continues. The Communist Party claims legitimacy through economic development and national revival, not elections. From the century of humiliation came national trauma and determination. The memory of foreign invasion and exploitation drives China's quest for strength, respect, and security. Never again could be China's motto. This explains China's sensitivity to perceived disrespect and its determination to reclaim what it sees as its rightful place. From the Communist Revolution came the party-state structure that governs China today. The Communist Party isn't just a political party, it's woven into every aspect of Chinese society and government. One-party rule is presented as uniquely suited to China's conditions and history. From Deng Xiaoping came pragmatism over ideology. Modern China combines communist politics with capitalist economics, authoritarian control with entrepreneurial freedom, Confucian values with technological modernity, contradictions that somehow function. Looking to the present and future. Today's China is both ancient and modern, confident and anxious, powerful and constrained. It's a civilization state in a world of nation-states, asserting its own model of development and governance. Chinese people today navigate between tradition and modernity, between collective demands and individual dreams. They've experienced transformation beyond any previous generation's imagination, from poverty to prosperity, from isolation to globalization, from weakness to power. China today is a technological leader in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and renewable energy. It's building cities, railways, and ports around the world. It's sending spacecraft to Mars and probes to the moon's far side. Chinese companies compete globally. Chinese culture, films, music, literature is reaching international audiences. Yet China also faces profound challenges. Can it escape the middle-income trap? Can it manage environmental crisis? Can it adapt to an aging society? Can it maintain growth and stability? Can it achieve its ambitions without conflict? These questions shape not just China's future, but the world's. Closing. Return to opening imagery. Modern China in all its complexity. Narrator. From the Yellow River's banks to the heights of global power, from oracle bones to artificial intelligence, from imperial dynasties to communist party rule, China's journey has been extraordinary. It's a story of brilliant innovation and terrible suffering, of cultural achievement and political oppression, of resilience through repeated catastrophe. No civilization has maintained continuity as long as China's. No nation has transformed as rapidly in recent decades. Understanding China requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. It's a country that invented paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass, and that fell behind technologically, suffering a century of humiliation. It's a civilization that valued learning and merit for millennia, and that persecuted intellectuals and burned books. It's a society that created sublime art and philosophy, and that destroyed much of its own cultural heritage. It's a government that lifted hundreds of millions from poverty, while maintaining authoritarian control. Final reflection. History doesn't repeat, but it echoes. The patterns of Chinese history, the quest for unity, the centralization of power, the absorption of foreign influences, the cycles of reform and reaction, the tension between continuity and change, continue shaping China's present and future. As we watch China's role in the 21st century unfold, we're witnessing not just a nation's rise but a civilization's revival, complex, contradictory, and consequential. The story of China is far from over. In many ways, it's entering its most fascinating chapter yet. For 4,000 years, through triumph and trauma, through unity and fragmentation, through glory and humiliation, China has endured, adapted, and transformed. That history, of resilience, of ambition, of continuity through change, is the key to understanding China today and tomorrow. The ancient meets the modern. The past shapes the present. Subscribe to our channel now to track the history of the world, one nation at a time.